A 39-year-old white-reddish-skin old man with radiant black eyes leaned on a tree while looking at the sky, thinking deeply about the life he has gone through. His name was Idris, though few called him by it anymore. Time had chipped away the edges of his identity like waves against a stone. What was once sharp had become smooth, ordinary, and quiet. He wasn't remarkable, not in the way people remembered. He was the kind of man who had lived more for others than himself, until the line between duty and purpose vanished completely. He watched it with a gaze that seemed to reach past the clouds, into memories that no longer spoke with words. There was a time he thought life would mean something, an adventure, a mission, a calling whispered through the winds of youth. But now, standing alone in the stillness, he wasn't so sure. The years had passed like strangers on a train. One by one they boarded, sat beside him for a while, and left taking with them pieces of his dreams, his youth, his love. He had been a husband once. Not the best, but never the worst. She had loved him like a flame loves the wick burning until nothing remained. He still remembered the last time she looked at him, not with anger, but with a tired kind of resignation, as if she had been holding her breath for years and finally let go. He had been a father too. But time and distance had a cruel way of building walls between those who once built castles in the living room. His son now lived far away, with new dreams and a new father figure who knew how to smile more and drink less. Now Idris stood beneath the tree, wondering when he had become invisible to others and to himself. The wind shifted. A leaf brushed against his arm before drifting to the soil. It felt like a whisper, or a sign. He closed his eyes. "Is there still time?" he asked no one. It was not a question of age. It was a question of worth. Was there still something in him worth redeeming, rebuilding, reclaiming? He thought of Santiago from The Alchemist, chasing his personal legend across the desert. He thought of McCandless from Into the Wild, trading the world for solitude and discovering too late that happiness is only real when shared. He thought of Ova, the grumpy old man who pretended to hate the world only because he had loved it too deeply once. Baby meaning wasn't something to find. Maybe it was something to remember. Idris looked at the tree he leaned against. Its roots were deep, its scars ran along its bark, but still it reached for the sky. And for the first time in many years, he took a breath that felt full. Somewhere deep inside, a thought surfaced. It is not too late. Not for him, not for the life he forgot he wanted. And in the quiet that followed, as the sun finally dipped beneath the horizon, Idris felt something move within him. Not a miracle, not a revelation, just the soft beginning of something real. The journey had not ended. It had not even begun. Not truly, not until now. The next morning, the wind was colder. Idris stood in front of his small, creaking house, paint peeling from the walls like old memories. The hinges on the gate moaned softly as he stepped through. The tree he had leaned on the night before was still visible in the distance, a dark silhouette against the pale morning sky. Somehow it felt like it had watched him sleep. Inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. He lived alone now. Had for years. The silence had become a roommate, familiar, constant, strangely comforting. But today it felt heavier, as if it knew something was about to change. He walked to the kitchen. The floor creaked beneath him. On the table sat a cold cup of coffee he never finished the night before. Beside it, a dusty photo frame turned face down. He stared at it for a moment, then slowly flipped it over. There she was, Lena, the woman who once laughed at his terrible jokes, who danced barefoot in the rain, who had loved him even when he forgot how to love himself. And beside her, a boy, maybe 10, maybe 11, with wild hair and wonder in his eyes. Idris touched the glass. Rafik, his son. Where had the years gone? There was no big fight, no argument, just the slow, invisible distance until it became silence. A silence that mirrored the one inside Idris. That morning, something pulled at him. A restlessness, a question. What now? For the first time in years, he reached for the dusty box under the bookshelf. Papers, journals, pieces of himself. Among them was a worn notebook filled with sketches and quotes. One line stood out, underlined 3 times in thick ink. A man doesn't find meaning by waiting for it to arrive. He finds it by walking toward what once scared him. He stared at the words. Maybe that was the problem. He had stopped walking. He stood up. The chair scraped behind him. He barely noticed. He grabbed a coat, his old boots, and the folded notebook. He didn't know where he was going, only that he couldn't stay still anymore. As he opened the door, the morning sun blinked through the trees, lighting the path just ahead. And for the first time in years, Idris stepped outside not to escape, but to search. He didn't need to know the destination. He only needed to begin walking. The road that Idris walked was older than memory. Each step on the uneven path felt like turning a page in a long-forgotten book. He didn't know exactly where he was going, only that something inside him had cracked open, and he needed to follow the pull. The notebook in his hand swung gently with his stride, its worn leather cover thumping softly against his thigh, like a heartbeat. The village he entered was quiet, tucked between hills like a secret. Ivy curled around stone houses. Faded curtains trembled behind glass. A few early risers nodded as he passed, their eyes brushing over him with the vague recognition people reserve for ghosts that used to be men. One woman stared longer than the rest, older eyes like wet ash. She stood in her garden, cradling a basket of herbs. When Idris met her gaze, she didn't look away. "You walk like someone who lost something," she said gently. Idris paused. "I suppose I did. Maybe myself." The woman didn't ask more. She simply offered a tired smile and turned back to her plants, as if she knew some things cannot be found by questioning. He continued on, stopping only when he reached the edge of the village, a stone bench beneath a crooked olive tree. There he sat. Birds chirped overhead, too alive for the sadness in his chest. He opened his notebook again. Near the back, he had scribbled a thought, maybe years ago. "The pain doesn't go away. It just becomes part of your walk." He closed the book, leaned forward, elbows on his knees, face to the ground. But the silence didn't hurt today. It felt like space, room, to rebuild. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rang. The sun climbed higher, scattering golden light across the village roofs. And for the first time, Idris didn't feel like a man running from his past. He felt like a man returning to it, not to state, but to learn. And maybe, in the echo of what he once was, he would find the seed of what he still could be. The sun was fully risen when Idris heard the sound. It wasn't music exactly, more like the faint beat of something heavy being struck, slow, steady, as though someone were drumming not for celebration, but for remembrance. The sound came from deeper in the village, past the bell tower and the old olive tree, where the road curved and disappeared into morning mist. Idris stood up from the bench, gripping his notebook tighter. Something in his chest stirred, curiosity maybe, or warning. He followed the sound. As he walked, he passed faded murals on crumbling walls, paintings of men holding torches, of women weeping under stars. They were worn, almost erased, but still breathing with a strange kind of presence, like echoes left behind by stories too sacred to forget. The beat grew louder, then he saw him. At the center of the square stood a tall, thin man in tattered robes, blindfolded with black cloth. Before him sat a large worn drum. He struck it with the flat of his hand again and again like a heartbeat that refused to stop. Around him, no one spoke. A few villagers watched from windows, unmoving. Idris hesitated at the edge of the square. The blindfolded man paused as if sensing him. Then he turned slightly and said, "You've come late, but not too late." Idris froze. "Do I know you?" The man didn't answer the question. Instead, he touched the drum gently and whispered, "Everyone carries one of these. Some beat it so loud they forget to listen. Yours hasn't sounded in a long time." Idris swallowed. "I don't even know what I'm looking for." "You will," the man said, voice low, "when your silence becomes a question instead of a prison." He struck the drum once more, deep, resonant, like a memory Idris had buried long ago. Without warning, the man stood and began walking away barefoot, leaving the drum behind. Idris watched him go, a strange ache twisting in his stomach. Then he looked at the drum. It sat there, alone, like something waiting to be understood. He took a step forward. That night, Idris stayed in the village. He found an old inn with a vacant room and a kind-eyed keeper who didn't ask questions. Before bed, he opened his notebook and wrote just 3 words. "I heard it." And he wondered if maybe, just maybe, his heart had been listening all along. The next morning brought mist. It clung to the village like a forgotten memory, softening edges, swallowing footsteps. Idris stepped out of the inn with his notebook under one arm, the blindfolded drummer's final words echoing in his mind. "When your silence becomes a question instead of a prison." He didn't know what it meant yet, but the weight of it followed him. Drawn by some quiet instinct, he wandered toward the bell tower. It loomed above the rooftops like a sentinel from another age, weathered by time but still standing. At its base was an archway, and beneath it, sitting cross-legged with a small metal cup between his feet, was a man. He was young, barely 20, dirty hood pulled over his head, coat torn at the sleeves, fingers trembling slightly as he played with a silver coin between them. He looked up as Idris approached, sharp eyes, guarded and tired. "No sermon here," the young man said. "The old priest's dead. Tower's empty." "I wasn't looking for a sermon," Idris replied. The boy smirked. Then you're the first. Silence lingered. Idris stood for a moment, unsure why he hadn't walked past. Mind if I sit? He asked. The boy shrugged. Suit yourself. No one else does. They sat in silence under the tower as the mist began to lift. The coin clinked softly as the boy flipped it between his fingers again and again. You local? The boy asked. No, Idris replied, just passing through. The boy nodded, unsurprised. Everyone's always passing through. No one stays unless they're stuck. What about you? I'm not stuck, he said too quickly. I'm just waiting. For what? The boy hesitated. For the right reason to leave. Idris glanced at him. He saw something familiar in that face. Restlessness wrapped in pain. He had worn that same expression once in his 20s, thinking running would fix everything. But eventually, time teaches you that no road outruns the self. You don't need the right reason to leave, Idris said. You need the right reason to stay. The boy didn't answer. But the coin in his fingers stopped spinning. They sat there for a long time, not speaking, letting the mist give way to light. Then the boy said quietly, They used to ring this bell for the dead. Every time someone passed, they rang it once. Idris looked up at the old bell, rusted, still, and silent. Strange, the boy whispered. How no one ever rings it when someone comes back to life. Idris turned to him sharply, but the boy only smiled, not with joy but with knowing. Then he stood, dusted off his coat, and said, Safe travels, old man. And just like that, he was gone. But the words remained like a gentle echo. Not everyone who's lost is looking for the way out. Some are waiting for a reason to begin again. Idris stared at the bell one last time, and then quietly he rang it. Idris didn't sleep well. The image of the boy under the bell tower haunted him, not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't. There was something in the way he looked at Idris, as if he already knew his story. The innkeeper served him warm bread and tea before dawn, offering no small talk. Idris appreciated that. Words weren't ready yet, not after yesterday. He stepped outside just as the sky began to pale. He had no plan, no destination, only the quiet pull that something, someone, was still waiting. As he passed the village chapel, half collapsed and overgrown with moss, he noticed a box nailed to the fence, a wooden slot weather-worn and cracked. Above it, a fading sign read, For the letters never sent. He stopped. A rusted tin can hung from a nail beside it, holding a few blank scraps of paper and a pencil. He reached for one almost without thinking. He hadn't written a letter in years, not since the last argument, not since the silence between him and his son became too wide to cross. Now under the soft dawn sky, he wrote, Rafiq, I don't know if this will ever reach you. I don't even know if I deserve it to. I used to think time would fix things, that silence meant peace, but now I see silence can also be a wound. You once asked me why I never smiled at your drawings. I didn't know how to tell you they reminded me of dreams I'd buried. That wasn't your fault, that was mine. If I could go back, no, never mind. I can't, but I can still be here, if you ever want to find me. Not to fix the past, but to walk forward anyway. Your father, still somehow Idris. He folded the note, hands trembling slightly, and slipped it into the box. There was no lock, no system, just an act of surrender, a symbolic release. He stood still for a moment after, the morning air cool against his face, and for the first time in a long time he didn't feel ashamed of who he had been. Just unfinished. From down the road, a voice called out, Going north? Idris turned. A man with a mule cart stood at the edge of the path, squinting against the sun. He wore a thick scarf and eyes that had seen more winters than smiles. I can take you as far as the old bridge, the man said. After that, you're on your own. Idris nodded slowly. I think that's exactly what I need. He climbed into the cart. The village faded behind him, but the silence remained. Not empty, not cruel, but full of something waiting to become music. The cart rumbled forward, and the sky once again opened wide above him. The cart rattled down a narrow path for over an hour, the forest closing in on both sides. Idris sat in silence beside the old driver, whose name he hadn't asked. There was something sacred about the quiet between strangers. It allowed room for thought without the need for performance. Eventually, the cart came to a stop. Before them stretched a long, crumbling stone bridge draped in fog, suspended over a gorge whose depth was hidden by mist. The air here was colder, tighter, as if the space itself held its breath. This is where I stop, the old man said. No one crosses unless they're ready. Ready for what? Idris asked. The man shrugged. To leave something behind. Idris climbed down, thanked him, and approached the bridge slowly. As he stepped onto the first stone slab, a voice called out from the fog. "Do you know what you're doing?" He turned. A woman stood at the far end of the bridge, wrapped in gray cloth, a satchel slung over her shoulder. Her hair was streaked with white despite her youth. She wasn't threatening, just still and sharp-eyed. "I'm not sure," Idris admitted, "but I know I can't go back." She nodded once. "Then you're exactly like me." They met in the middle. Neither of them spoke for a moment, then she said, "Everyone who crosses this bridge has a burden. What's yours?" Idris hesitated. "A son I haven't spoken to in 12 years. A wife I stopped praying for. A version of myself I gave up on." She looked at him gently. "And still you walk forward?" "I have to," he said. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small, flat stone. "Then mark it." He looked at her, puzzled. "It's tradition," she said, "to leave a stone for what you leave behind." Idris took the stone, gripped it for a long moment, then knelt and placed it beside the others. Smooth river rocks etched with names, symbols, scars. He didn't carve his, he simply whispered, "Regret," and let the wind take the rest. When he stood, the woman was already walking ahead. "Come," she said without looking back. "We have further to go." At the other side of the bridge, the mist cleared just enough to reveal an open road, winding, unfamiliar, and golden under the first light of morning. Idris followed, and as he walked, he realized something had stayed behind. Not everything, just enough to walk lighter. The road after the bridge wound like a river of silence. Idris walked slowly, boots cracking old leaves, the fog lifting behind him. Every step felt lighter now, though not because his burden was gone. It was simply shared with the road, left behind with the stone he placed. By midday, the trees opened into a wide plain, and nestled within it, a quiet village with blue-roofed homes and fields of tall golden grass swaying like breath. He entered unnoticed. Children played near a well, laughing in circles. But one girl stood apart, barefoot, hair tangled, arms full of odd objects. Feathers, stones, broken watches, an old comb. She was arranging them on a cloth near a tree, carefully as if they meant something only she understood. Idris stopped, curious. She looked up at him with calm, dark eyes. "You don't belong here." "I'm just passing through," she shrugged. "Everyone says that. Some are right." He watched her arrange a broken mirror and a piece of string side by side. "What are you doing?" he asked, collecting shadows. He tilted his head. "Shadows?" She nodded, pointing to the items. "Things people dropped when they were sad. I keep them. I think they still remember who left them behind." Idris said nothing. She picked up the mirror and handed it to him. "This one is yours," he blinked. "How do you know?" "It doesn't lie. Look." He turned it in his hands. The glass was cracked, but in the reflection he didn't just see himself. He saw the tree he had leaned on in Chapter 1, the sky, the notebook, the empty chair at his old kitchen table, and a boy with wild hair watching him from behind. He gasped softly. "I think you've been carrying someone else's silence," the girl said. "You can give it back, you know." "To who?" "To the part of you that stopped speaking." Idris knelt, setting the mirror down gently. "What's your name?" "Doesn't matter," she smiled. "But you can call me Kira." She stood up, brushing dust from her skirt. "You should go to the orchard behind the well. The woman there makes tea for people who are tired." "Tired of walking?" Kira shook her head. "Tired of running." As Idris walked toward the orchard, mirror still in hand, he realized something strange. The girl hadn't looked at him with pity or wonder or fear. She looked at him like a man who was already on the edge of being found. And maybe that was the truth, maybe he was. The orchard behind the well was unlike any Idris had seen. The trees weren't in neat rows and no two bore the same fruit. Some had apples, others pomegranates. Others had leaves that shimmered with a silvery hue. There was no sound, only the soft rustling of wind between branches, like the trees were whispering secrets to one another. At the center of the orchard stood a weathered table beneath a gnarled fig tree. A woman sat alone, pouring tea into mismatched cups. "Sit," she said without looking up. "You're late." Idris hesitated. "Do you know me?" "I know everyone who carries silence like a spine," she replied. "Sit," he obeyed. She poured him a dark amber liquid that smelled of rain and firewood. No steam rose from it, yet it was warm when he touched it. What is this place?" he asked. "A waiting room for the parts of you that haven't caught up yet." He frowned. "I don't understand." "You will." She leaned forward, eyes as deep as the earth. Do you know what you're still afraid of? He said nothing. She continued. You think that healing means going back to who you were, but healing is becoming someone who can carry what you've lived through without breaking. He looked down at his hands. I've made too many mistakes. Good, she said. That means you're not dead inside. A pause. Then, why don't you write anymore? Idris blinked. I never told you I wrote. You didn't have to. Writers are the only ones who carry silence like that. She slid a journal across the table. It looked just like his old one, the one he left in his son's drawer years ago. His breath caught. Not everything you lose is gone, she said gently. Some things just wait. He opened it. The first page was blank, and below it, one sentence in his handwriting. Say it even if your voice breaks. Tears welled up uninvited. The woman stood and began to walk away. Where are you going? He called. To tend the trees. They only grow when someone admits they've been lost. He remained seated, staring at the journal, the cup of tea cooling beside him, and somewhere between guilt and grace he picked up the pen. That night, Idris stayed beneath the orchard, resting in a quiet shelter behind the fig trees. The woman was gone by morning, but the journal remained in his lap, its blank pages trembling slightly in the breeze, as if waiting for his truth. He didn't write, not yet. Instead, he walked. The road led him to a small clearing where villagers gathered for their morning bread. It was simple. A circle of stones, a clay oven, and a man kneading dough with hands that looked like they'd survived both war and winter. The man looked up, smiled without asking questions, and gestured for Idris to sit. He did. They didn't speak. The smell of warm bread filled the air, and when it was ready, the man broke a piece and handed it to Idris. No price, no words. Idris took it with hesitation, then gratitude. It was soft, fragrant, and carried the taste of memory. When the bread was gone, the man finally spoke. Are you tired of carrying it yet? Idris blinked. Carrying what? Everything. He didn't answer. The man nodded slowly, as if the silence was an answer. Most people think they have to heal alone, that if someone offers help, it makes them weak. Idris looked away. That's how I was raised. Then maybe it's time to stop being who you were raised to be and become who you were meant to be. The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they felt like a truth Idris had buried beneath years of discipline and pride. You don't have to tell me your story, the man said. But let me give you one thing. He reached into a cloth bag and handed Idris a small bundle wrapped in parchment. For the road ahead. Idris opened it. Inside was another piece of bread and a folded note. Written in shaky handwriting were 3 simple words. You are found. He felt the weight of it hit him like wind through a cracked window. It wasn't a message for a hero, or a warrior, or a man who had triumphed. It was a message for someone still unfinished, someone like him. As Idris walked away, the journal in his satchel and the note in his coat pocket, the morning air felt different. Not lighter, not warmer, but closer, like life had taken one step toward him and was waiting to see if he'd take the next. The wind shifted that morning. It wasn't dramatic, no sudden storm or thunder, but Idris felt it all the same. A quiet pull, like the hush before a name is spoken. He followed the path east, past olive groves and stones painted with forgotten prayers, until he reached a hollow nestled between 2 hills. A stream cut through its center, and beside it, a crumbling structure, half library, half sanctuary. The door was open. Inside, shelves leaned like tired elders, filled with books missing their titles. Dust danced in the morning sun, and in the far corner, a single chair faced an old writing table. He sat. The journal from the orchard rested in his hands, still empty. He opened it to the first page and wrote, I have not disappeared. I have only been silent long enough to believe I had. His own handwriting startled him. It felt unfamiliar, like reading someone else's confessions. More came. I blamed the world for my stillness when I was the one who stopped speaking. I waited for someone to forgive me, but forgot to ask if I could forgive myself. He paused, then heard it. Not sound, but something subtler, like the memory of a voice echoing between the pages. His own voice from years ago. Soft, raw, and it said, You were never writing for them. You were writing to return to yourself. He closed his eyes. The ache in his chest wasn't pain now. It was breath return. Outside, wind passed through the open door like an invitation. The world didn't expect an answer, but maybe for once he would give one anyway. He turned the page and kept writing. The air grew colder as Idris wandered deeper into the mountain pass. Trees thinned, rocks grew sharper. His breath began to show in clouds, like he was exhaling secrets he hadn't meant to confess. At dusk he saw smoke, not thick or panicked, soft and rising, controlled. A fire, he followed it. Near a cliff edge, tucked beneath a wind-worn overhang, sat a man roasting something over the flames. The stranger looked up but didn't flinch. His eyes were sharp but not unkind. "You came a long way just to stare," the man said. "I wasn't sure if I should approach." "You still aren't." Idris sat anyway. They shared the heat in silence. The man offered bread, dried fruit. Idris accepted, surprised at how natural it felt. "You look like a man who's trying to escape something that no longer chases him," the man said after a while. Idris gave a dry smile. "That obvious?" "To men who've run too," the stranger replied. "Yes." There was a long pause. The fire crackled between them. The man studied Idris, then spoke slowly. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Have you forgiven the version of yourself who didn't know better?" The question hit him like frost, subtle, then sudden. Idris looked away. "I don't know how." The man nodded, tossing a twig into the flames. "Then that's where your road ends, or begins again." Idris stared into the fire. In the glow, he didn't just see the man across from him. He saw a younger version of himself. Not smiling, not angry, just watching, waiting. The fire didn't judge him. It simply asked him to sit with what he'd once buried. And so that night, Idris said nothing, but he didn't run. And for the first time in years, he felt the weight shift. Not disappear, but move. The mountains grew behind him. The path sloped downward now, not easier, but clearer. Idris found a village nestled beside a wide, quiet river. Its current moved like time in slow motion, and something about its stillness drew him to the bank, where a bench had been carved from old wood. He sat and opened the journal again. But this time, he didn't write for himself. He wrote for his son. "To the boy who stopped writing, I remember when your letters stopped arriving. I told myself it was your age, your distractions, your distance. But the truth was you stopped when I stopped listening. You used to write about stars and birds and dreams I didn't understand. And instead of asking to know more, I taught you how to stay quiet like I did. I was afraid of your questions. Of mine. But mostly I was afraid to let you see that I didn't have answers." The pen hovered above the page. The sun shimmered on the water, and in that shimmer Idris saw the reflection of a boy. Not clearly, just a ghost of memory. Laughing at something Idris couldn't remember. Holding a notebook, not hiding. He continued, "I don't write this expecting forgiveness. I write it because the silence between us deserves a grave. Not to bury love, but to bury shame. So something else can grow." He closed the journal. His breath trembled in his chest, but it didn't break. A child ran by the riverbank, laughing as they chased a floating leaf. Idris smiled, not because he knew them, but because he remembered. What it meant to laugh without reason, what it meant to trust the world again. And just like that, he began walking again. Slower this time, but not because he was tired. Because the weight had shifted again, and something inside him had begun to bloom. The rain came slowly, like the sky was remembering how to weep. Idris entered a town where time moved slower than thought. The streets were quiet, lined with stone houses and narrow alleys that led nowhere in particular. He wasn't looking for anyone, but he found her. She stood behind the counter of a modest bookshop, adjusting the position of a small, hand-stitched notebook. Her hair was streaked with silver now, but her presence was the same. Composed, distant, soft like linen forgotten in the sun. Her eyes met his. For a long time, neither moved. "I wasn't sure I'd ever see you again," she said, voice calm. "I wasn't sure I'd ever be worth seeing again." She smiled faintly. "You still think in riddles, and you still speak like you've already forgiven what hasn't been asked for." Silence passed between them, not heavy, not cold. "Just full." She gestured to the door behind the counter. "There's tea if you want." He followed her in. The back room was small, filled with books she hadn't sold and a kettle warming on a quiet stove. A single chair sat beside a window with light so gentle it felt sacred. "I left this room unlocked," she said, pouring tea, "for years." He blinked. "Why?" "Because part of me believed you might come back. Not to stay, just to leave something behind properly." Idris lowered his gaze. "I don't have words." "You're not here for words," she said. "You're here to say goodbye to the version of yourself who hurt me." His throat tightened. She placed the tea in front of him. "Let him go," she said, "not cruel, not kind, just honest. That version served no one, not even you." He stared at the steam. It curled upward like a prayer, fragile, brief. And then he whispered, "I'm sorry." She nodded. No need for more. The tea cooled between them. But something else, quiet, unseen, warmed. As he rose to leave, she placed a folded page in his palm. He didn't open it. He just held it to his chest and stepped back into the rain. Idris stood at the edge of a cliff, the sky stretching endlessly above him, painted in twilight. Not quite day, not yet night. A time between certainties. He looked over the valley below, where rivers carved the land like veins and forests breathed in the silence. There was no crowd, no witness, no applause. Just him and the sky. He sat beneath a solitary tree, the wind humming gently around him. The journal, now half filled, rested in his lap. He turned to a new page and wrote, "I thought I had to find meaning, but maybe I only had to stop running from it." The wind turned a little colder. He removed a small object from his coat, the letter the woman had given him. Only now did he unfold it. Inside, a single line, "Come home when the sky is ready to listen." He smiled because he knew now it always had been. Not because it gave him signs, not because it gave him answers, but because it never stopped holding space for him to return. He breathed in, and for the first time in years, the silence around him didn't feel empty. It felt full, alive. Sacred. Far below, someone lit a lantern. A boy stood near the riverbank, notebook in hand, looking up at the sky. And somewhere in the space between two distant hearts, a silence was broken, and a father was heard. The end, but perhaps only the beginning.